Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating exploration into the life and specifically the education of Cole Porter, a true giant of Broadway.
Absolutely. And what's so intriguing about Porter, I think, is the sheer, well, the breadth and depth of his academic background. It's not what you always expect.
Exactly. And that's really what we want to unpack today. How did all that schooling shape him?
We've gathered quite a bit for this, details on his schools, analyses of those formative times, even how his work is, looked at now in classrooms.
Right. So our mission here is to really try and understand how both the formal classes and the sort of informal learning experiences came together to create his groundbreaking music.
And that brings us, I think, neatly to a question that seems to always hang around Cole Porter. Was he, in a way, maybe too educated for Broadway?
Interesting way to put it.
Did that deep dive into classics and formal music maybe create a barrier?
Hmm.
Or did it actually, elevate his ability to write these incredibly popular, timeless songs?
And how did his path stack up against his peers? That comparison is key, too.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, education-wise. Worcester Academy. He was there from 1905 to 1909.
Right. Our source describes it as, well, pretty elite. A top-tier prep school. Very rigorous, big emphasis on classical languages, literature, discipline, too.
And he did well there.
Oh, yeah. Excelled, apparently, especially in Latin and French. And this is important.
How so?
Well, our source suggests this early language skill, this dexterity, clearly fed into his later lyrics. That clever wordplay, the multilingual touches.
Like in You're the Top, or even Brush Up Your Shakespeare.
Exactly. It just gave him a much wider vocabulary, a bigger toolkit to play with right from the start.
It wasn't just languages, though, was it? He also studied classical history, oratory.
And it's fascinating to think how that might have informed his songwriting.
You mean like the structure, understanding narrative from history, maybe persuasive techniques from oratory? Could that have shaped how he built a song?
It's a really compelling thought. That training in rhetoric, in building a clear, well-timed argument, it probably translated into how he structured his songs. They often build, don't they, towards a punchline or a central idea.
Yeah, there's an architecture there beneath the wit.
Definitely more than just clever rhymes.
Our source also mentions he was writing and staging comic operettas even back at Worcester. Sounds like an early laboratory for him.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Think about it, low stakes, really. But he's experimenting with all these things that become his trademarks later on.
Like?
Well, developing characters through song, using irony, playing with rhyme and rhythm, figuring out pacing, tone, and maybe most importantly, getting a feel for what an audience responds to.
You can almost see the Broadway composers starting to emerge.
Right there in prep school.
And he wasn't just, blending in. He was the valedictorian.
He was. And apparently, his farewell speech was noted for being witty and charming, which sort of foreshadows that sophisticated public image he cultivated later, doesn't it?
It really does. And if Worcester emphasized precision, clarity, maybe that early training contributed to the sharpness in his songs, that control, even when things seem light and playful.
It's very possible. How carefully he chose his words, the underlying point he was making.
Yeah.
Yeah, the roots could definitely be there.
Okay, let's move on. Next stop, Yale, 1909 to 1913.
Right. Another big name, obviously, Ivy League. Our source describes Yale then as having this particular focus on intellectual elegance, verbal skill, especially in humanities and social sciences.
So a slightly different flavor than Worcester's classical focus.
Yeah, a bit broader, perhaps. He studied English lit, history, kept up his Latin and French, added German, and importantly, music appreciation and composition.
That seems key.
Hugely. That mix of subjects would have really broadened his creative horizons.
But it sounds like his life outside the classroom at Yale was just as important, maybe even more so, for his songwriting.
Absolutely. He dove right in. Yale Glee Club, the Yale Drama, the Drama Society, Delta Kappa Epsilon fraternity, some elite social club too. His dorm room was apparently the place for rehearsals.
Wow. So that's where the music really took off.
That's where the practical side exploded. Our source says he wrote over 300 songs at Yale.
300?
Yep. For student shows, football rallies, songs like Bingo Eli Yale, Bulldog, those kinds of anthems and bigger theatrical productions. Just think of the sheer practice that involved, honing his craft constantly.
And writing the whole score for the Yale Drama's big annual musical review, that sounds like a massive learning experience.
Oh, for sure. That's where he'd have really learned about collaboration, about how music actually works on a stage,
Mm.
dealing with staging, rewriting things that didn't land.
Real-world theater training, essentially.
Exactly. And Yale gave him his first proper, consistent audience. He was learning right there in the moment what worked, what didn't, how to write for different moods, different situations. That adaptability was crucial for his later career.
And Yale seems to be where those signature complex rhyme schemes really started taking shape.
It seems likely. Our source points to later hits like Let's Do It or I Get a Kick Out of You as prime examples, but you can bet he was playing with that kind of linguistic cleverness in those Yale shows, experimenting.
You can just picture it.
And his work with the Glee Club and the Dramette,
Yeah.
it directly points towards his Broadway future, right? Composing for groups of singers, working with singers, getting that immediate buzz from a live audience. Invaluable.
Okay, so Yale was clearly massive.
Yeah.
Then comes Harvard, 1913 to 1915.
And this phase starts, interestingly, at Harvard Law School.
Law school. That seems unexpected.
It does. And our source suggests it wasn't a great fit, much more austere, competitive, maybe clashed with his artistic side. Seems he struggled a bit academically and, well, maybe just finding his place there.
But then he switched.
Yes, and this is the pivotal moment at Harvard. He transferred to the Harvard School of Music.
Ah, okay. That makes more sense.
And this was a totally different world. The music school, according to our source, was heavily focused on European conservatory traditions, much more formal technical music training.
Like what specifically?
Well, counterpoint, weaving independent melodies together, fugue, harmony, the real deep dive into chord structures and progressions, voice leading, ear training, orchestration, how to write for all the different instruments, music history too.
Serious stuff.
Very serious. The instructors apparently really hammered precision, discipline, fluency in the technical language of music.
Our source mentions specific assignments, like writing 4-part chorales, orchestrating folk songs, analyzing symphonies.
Yeah, really getting into the nuts and bolts. And unlike law school, he seems to have thrived here.
This is where he really honed the technical craft.
Absolutely. This is where he developed the skills that let him create those subtle harmonic shadings, those surprising key changes, modulations, and those elegant, sometimes unexpected endings, the cadences you hear in songs like Night and Day or Every Time We Say Goodbye.
So it's not just catchy tunes, there's a real harmonic sophistication under the hood.
Precisely. Built on a solid understanding of theory and technique learned at Harvard. He was even writing art songs, instrumental pieces for student recitals, getting comfortable in that more formal musical world.
It's interesting, though. Do you think even that brief, difficult time in law school might have sharpened anything? Maybe his sense of structure? Logic?
That's a fascinating thought. Perhaps that focus on logical reasoning, even though it wasn't his path, helped him construct those complex musical numbers later, gave them a kind of structural integrity. It's possible.
But the main takeaway from Harvard Music School is really that formal grounding.
Definitely. It gave him the technical toolkit, the professional vocabulary to create music that was both deeply sophisticated and commercially appealing. It gave him the confidence, the foundation, to really play with musical forms.
And his ability to orchestrate his own songs so effectively with such dramatic impact that comes straight out of these studies, right?
Directly. He wasn't just thinking melody and chords. He was hearing the whole orchestra, the full soundscape, thanks to that Harvard training.
So after all this intense schooling, our deep dive follows him into the professional world. Tin Pan Alley.
Right. And our source points out that it wasn't smooth sailing initially. He faced struggles and learned a really crucial lesson.
Which was?
How to communicate all that sophistication he'd acquired without losing the audience. How to make it accessible.
Ah, the See America First experience. The show that didn't quite work.
Exactly. Highlighted as a key learning moment. It really showed that balancing act needed in popular entertainment. You can have all the technique in the world, but you still need to connect.
And Elizabeth Marbury's role in that, getting it produced.
Yeah, that's important too. Even though the show failed, her belief in him, her support, her guidance, that was invaluable early on, shows how mentorship matters even when things don't succeed immediately.
Our source suggests that early rejection actually taught him something valuable. Humility, maybe. Sensitivity.
I think so. It forced him to think more deeply about how to craft songs that really resonated, that connected emotionally with a wider range of people. He had to learn to weave his knowledge into something memorable, something that felt right.
You can kind of track that evolution, can't you? Comparing something early like Old-Fashioned Garden to later masterpieces like So in Love or In the Still of the Night.
Absolutely. You hear him learning to channel that sophisticated understanding into something more direct, more universally felt, while still keeping that unique Porter touch.
Okay, so after Tin Pan Alley, he heads back to Europe, Paris specifically, the Schola Cantorum in the 1920s.
hmm And this sounds like yet another level of intense classical immersion.
How so? What was the Schola Cantorum like?
Well, it was a very prestigious private conservatory, very
Mhm.
traditional curriculum, rooted in things like Gregorian chant, Renaissance polyphony, multiple vocal lines from that era and complex counterpoint.
And his teacher there was Vincent d'Indy.
Yes, a major figure. D&D emphasized things like thematic unity across a piece, using older scales, modal structures, cyclical forms, really serious compositional ideas.
So, more harmony, counterpoint, fugue studies, demanding exercises.
Exactly. The environment is described as very serious, very focused. And Porter's position was kind of unique, wasn't it? Here's this guy writing witty Broadway tunes, subjecting himself to this incredibly rigorous classical training.
Did he write classical pieces there?
It seems likely his Schola project's fugues, maybe chamber pieces, were kept separate from his commercial work, but that training undoubtedly deepened his harmonic thinking, his command of orchestration even further.
It's just fascinating how he brought that gravitas, those techniques, back to American musical theater.
It really set him apart. You can hear hints of it, maybe, and subtle orchestral touches, those smooth, elegant transitions within songs, the way he uses key changes for emotional effect.
It's that artistic alchemy our source mentioned, taking rigorous French techniques and blending them with Broadway wit.
Precisely. He learned to think even more orchestrally, to see songs not just as standalone numbers, but as part of a bigger musical picture.
And his time in Europe wasn't just about formal music school, right? There was the whole cultural immersion aspect, too. Paris, Venice, the salons, the high society.
Absolutely crucial informal education. That immersion in European elegance, sophistication, the art world, the social scene, it profoundly shaped his whole aesthetic, his worldview.
Which comes through so clearly in the lyrics.
Oh, definitely. That's
Yeah.
why they're full of references, high art, politics, fashion, fancy food. It reflects the world he was moving in.
You're the top is the classic example, isn't it? Or
Yeah.
anything goes, all those
Yeah.
name drops.
Exactly. And his genius was being able to take those often quite elite cultural references
Mm.
and make them sound sparkling, witty, and somehow completely relatable for a mass audience.
Yeah,
It's a rare skill.
really is. Okay, so let's pull all this together and revisit that big question. Was Cole Porter actually overeducated for Broadway?
Yeah, and the comparison with his contemporaries here is really illuminating, as our source points out.
Right. You look at Irving Berlin
Largely self-taught. Couldn't even read music in the traditional way.
or George Gershwin.
Some formal lessons, sure, but mostly developed his style through playing, experimenting, instinct.
Richard Rodgers.
He did have formal study at Columbia and the Institute of Musical Art, but his focus was so much on the collaboration, the song within the show context.
And then there's Porter, Worcester, Yale, Harvard Music School, the Schola Cantorum. I mean, it's an incredibly extensive, classically rigorous education.
Totally different league in terms of formal training, and yet he chose popular song. That's the fascinating part.
He somehow managed to blend the best of all worlds, didn't he? Berlin's knack for melody, Gershwin's harmonic daring, Rodgers' theatrical sense.
But all filtered through this incredible academic precision and breadth of knowledge.
Mm.
His fluency with languages, the literary references, the classical forms, it just made his work stand out on Broadway, especially given where many other composers were coming from.
So our source argues his education wasn't a liability, it actually became his signature.
Exactly. It defined his style, his ambition. It let him, elevate the American popular song, make it more sophisticated while still being hugely entertaining.
And while maybe some worried his intellect might get in the way.
In the end, it allowed him to bridge that gap, didn't it? Yeah. Appeal to both the sophisticated listener and the general public. He proved popular music could be smart, adventurous, culturally aware, and still fun.
And that legacy, that impact, it continues today in a very direct way, doesn't it? Through education itself.
It really does. Our source makes a strong point that Porter songs are now staple material in music education worldwide.
How so? In what ways?
Well, at top conservatories like Juilliard, they're analyzing his complex harmonies, his use of secondary dominants, those chromatic shifts we talked about.
Yeah.
At places like Berkeley, known for jazz and contemporary music, they study his work for interpretation, for vocal phrasing.
And in theater programs.
Absolutely. NYU's Tisch, for example, he's essential in courses on American musical theater history. They look at the sophisticated lyrics, the clever structures.
It's not just music schools either, is it? Our source mentions literature departments.
Right. His lyrics are often treated as poetry now, analyzed for their tight rhythms, those internal rhymes, the skillful way he uses allusions. Songs like Just One of Those Things or Begin the Begin get studied like literary texts.
Wow. Even high school AP English classes might touch on him for wit and irony.
It's quite something. Educators use his whole career as a kind of case study, how you can take deep learning and transform it into popular art. His own journey is a teaching model.
So places like Juilliard, Manhattan School of Music, Berkeley, NYU, they're all actively studying his work. And his lyrics pop up in literature anthologies.
His influence has really permeated how we teach and study both music and lyrics. It's quite a legacy.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it seems crystal clear that Porter's education wasn't just some background detail, it was fundamental.
Absolutely. Foundational. Every single stage, Worcester, Yale, Harvard, the Schola, even the informal learning in Europe, it all contributed something vital to his unique artistry.
He really absorbed the lessons from all those institutions and, well, alchemized them into his work.
hmm And in doing that, Cole Porter really did reimagine what musical storytelling could be, didn't he? He stretched the boundaries of popular taste, innovated with musical forms, all through song.
So maybe the answer to that question was he too educated for Broadway? Was actually no. Maybe he was perfectly educated for it.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. Perfectly educated for Broadway. And it makes you think, doesn't it, about how our own journeys, our own mix of formal and informal learning shape how we connect with art, how we understand it.